Man breaks down. After insulting old veteran, learns he was saved by him years ago. The Fallen Star Tavern stood as a beacon of warmth against the encroaching darkness of the rural town's main street. Its weathered wooden sign creaked softly in the cool evening breeze, the faded paint still discernible in the dim glow of the streetlights. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and the day's special, a hearty beef stew that had long since been cleared from the few occupied tables. Alex pushed open the heavy door, the familiar jingle of bells announcing his arrival. He paused for a moment, allowing his eyes to adjust to the tavern's muted lighting. The place was a second home to him, a sanctuary where he could shed the weight of his daily struggles and lose himself in the comforting embrace of alcohol and camaraderie. At 32, Alex carried himself with the weariness of a man twice his age. His once bright eyes now held a distant, haunted look, a testament to the horrors he had witnessed during his time in the military. The transition back to civilian life had been far from smooth, and Alex found himself grappling with demons that refused to be silenced. Alcohol had become his crutch, a temporary respite from the memories that plagued his nights and the emptiness that filled his days. He made his way to his usual spot at the bar, nodding a greeting to the familiar faces scattered throughout the room. A group of his friends was already there, their laughter a stark contrast to the melancholy that seemed to cling to Alex like a second skin. "Hey man, thought you weren't gonna make it," Mark called out, raising his glass in welcome. Alex managed a weak smile as he settled onto the worn leather stool. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, signaling the bartender for his usual, a double whiskey, neat. The amber liquid arrived quickly, and Alex wasted no time in taking a long, burning sip. The alcohol scorched its way down his throat, a sensation he had come to associate with relief. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed freely, Alex felt the familiar numbness begin to take hold. It was a feeling he craved, the blissful disconnect from the world and his own troubled thoughts. His friends' voices became a comforting background noise, their jokes and stories washing over him without really penetrating the fog that had settled in his mind. It was during one of these moments of hazy detachment that Alex's attention was drawn to the far end of the bar. An elderly man sat alone, his hunched figure barely visible in the shadows. What caught Alex's eye was the faded military jacket the old man wore, its patches and insignias a silent testament to a life of service. Something about the sight of the jacket stirred a bitter resentment in Alex's chest. Here was a man who wore his past so openly, while Alex fought daily to bury his own memories. The whiskey in his system fanned the flames of his discontent, and before he knew it, words were spilling from his mouth. "Hey, check out the relic at the end of the bar," Alex said, his voice carrying more than he intended. His friends turned to look, their expressions a mix of curiosity and mild discomfort. "Come on, Alex," Sarah, one of the group, said softly. "Leave him be. He's not bothering anyone." But Alex was beyond heeding such advice. The alcohol had loosened his tongue and lowered his inhibitions, allowing years of pent-up frustration to bubble to the surface. He stood up, swaying slightly as he pointed an accusing finger at the old man. "What's the deal? Old-timer," Alex called out, his words slurring slightly. "You come here often, showing off that jacket, looking for a free drink or a pat on the back?" The old man, who Alex would later learn was named Bill, didn't respond. He remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the glass in front of him. This lack of reaction only served to further agitate Alex. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Alex's voice rose, drawing the attention of the other patrons. The atmosphere in the bar shifted, tension crackling in the air like static electricity before a storm. Bill finally turned, his weathered face impassive as he regarded Alex with clear, steady eyes. There was something in that gaze, a depth of experience, perhaps, or a well of patience, that momentarily gave Alex pause. But the alcohol in his system quickly pushed aside any hesitation. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue," Alex sneered, taking a stumbling step towards Bill. "Or are you just too important to talk to us regular folks?" Mark stood up, placing a hand on Alex's shoulder. Come on, man, that's enough. Let's just enjoy our drinks, all right? But Alex shrugged off his friend's attempt at intervention. He was too far gone, too caught up in the maelstrom of his own emotions to back down now. The old man in the military jacket had become a symbol of everything Alex resented, the lingering specter of his past, the struggle to find his place in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. What's the point of sitting here pretending you're still important? Alex spat, his words laced with venom. The war's over, old man. Time to join the rest of us in the real world. A hush fell over the bar. Even those who had been trying to mind their own business couldn't help but turn to watch the unfolding scene. Bill remained silent, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Alex's drunken tirade. But there was a flicker in the old man's eyes, a brief flash of pain that he quickly masked behind a facade of indifference. As Alex continued his verbal assault, he failed to notice the subtle changes in Bill's posture. The old man's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, and his hand tightened around his glass. It was as if he was steeling himself, drawing upon reserves of strength and dignity that had been forged in fires Alex could only imagine. The other patrons watched with a mix of discomfort and morbid fascination. Some shifted in their seats, torn between the desire to intervene and the fear of escalating the situation. Others whispered among themselves, piecing together what little they knew about the two men at the center of this unexpected drama. As the night wore on and Alex's tirade showed no signs of abating, the atmosphere in the Fallen Star Tavern grew increasingly tense. What had started as a typical Friday night was rapidly descending into something uglier, a confrontation that threatened to expose the raw nerves and unhealed wounds that lay just beneath the surface of their small community. Little did anyone know that this uncomfortable encounter was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge perceptions, unearth long-buried truths, and ultimately lead to an unexpected journey of redemption and understanding. The silence that followed Alex's outburst was deafening. It hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and oppressive, as all eyes in the Fallen Star Tavern fixed on the unfolding drama. Bill, the elderly veteran at the end of the bar, remained motionless, his weathered hands wrapped around his glass, knuckles white with tension. The flickering neon signs cast an eerie glow on his face, highlighting the deep lines etched by time and experience. Alex, fueled by liquid courage and years of suppressed anger, stood swaying slightly, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. The initial rush of his outburst was beginning to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. He had expected, perhaps even hoped for, a reaction, an argument, anything to justify the storm of emotions raging within him. But Bill's stoic silence was unnerving, a calm in the eye of the hurricane that Alex had unleashed. "What's the matter, old man? Got nothing to say?" Alex's voice cracked slightly, betraying the uncertainty that was beginning to seep through his drunken bravado. He took a stumbling step forward, closing the distance between himself and Bill. The other patrons in the bar watched the scene unfold with a mixture of discomfort and morbid fascination. Many of them were regulars, familiar faces in this small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. They had seen their fair share of drunken arguments and petty squabbles, but this felt different. There was an undercurrent of pain and desperation in Alex's words that struck a chord with many of them. At a corner table, Old Joe, a grizzled Vietnam vet who had been coming to the Fallen Star since before most of the current patrons were born, leaned forward in his seat. His roomy eyes narrowed as he studied Bill, recognition dawning on his face. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it, sinking back into the shadows with a troubled expression. Behind the bar, Lucy, the owner's daughter who had been tending bar since she was old enough to reach the taps, watched the confrontation with growing concern. She had known Alex since high school, had watched him leave for the army a bright-eyed idealist and return a shell of his former self. Her hand hovered near the phone, ready to call for help if things escalated. "Come on, man. Leave him alone. He's just sitting there." Mark tried again to intervene, his voice laced with embarrassment and concern for his friend. He placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, attempting to guide him back to their table, but Alex shrugged him off, his eyes never leaving Bill's impassive face. No, I want to hear what he has to say. Come on, old-timer. Regale us with your war stories. Tell us how you saved the world. Bill finally set down his glass, the soft clink of glass on wood seeming to echo in the tense silence. He turned slowly on his stool, facing Alex fully for the first time. The movement was deliberate, almost regal in its composure. His eyes, clear and sharp despite his advanced years, met Alex's unflinchingly. For a moment, it seemed as though Bill might speak. The entire bar held its collective breath, waiting. But instead, the old veteran simply regarded Alex with a long, measured look. There was no anger in his gaze, no challenge or reproach. If anything, there was a glimmer of understanding, perhaps even compassion, that seemed to cut through Alex's drunken haze like a knife. The lack of response only served to fuel Alex's frustration. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if Bill's silent scrutiny was laying bare all the pain and insecurity he had tried so hard to bury. What? You think you're better than us? Too good to even acknowledge us lowly civilians? A few of the other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tom, a middle-aged construction worker who had served a tour in Iraq, stood up slowly. Alex, that's enough, he said, his voice low but firm. You've had your say. Let it go. But Alex was too far gone, too caught up in the maelstrom of his own emotions to heed the warning. He sneered at Tom, then turned back to Bill. See? That's how a real vet acts. Not sitting around in an old jacket, looking for handouts. Bill's expression remained unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in his posture. He straightened slightly, his shoulders squaring as if preparing to bear a heavy weight. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but it caught the attention of those watching closely. In the corner, old Joe leaned over to his drinking companion, his voice a gravelly whisper. I know that fella. Saw him once, years ago. If half the stories I've heard are true. He trailed off, shaking his head slowly. The atmosphere in the bar had become electric, charged with unspoken tensions and half-remembered histories. Each person present felt the weight of the moment, sensing that they were witnessing something significant, even if they couldn't quite grasp its full meaning. Lucy, still behind the bar, cleared her throat. Alex, she called out, her voice gentle but firm. I think it's time you called it a night. Let me call you a cab. But Alex wasn't ready to let go. He turned to Lucy, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and pain. No, I'm not done. I want to hear what he has to say. Come on, old man. Speak up. As Alex's voice rose to a shout, Bill finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand. The simple gesture, devoid of any aggression, nonetheless had an immediate effect. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Bill's lips parted, and for a moment, it seemed he might finally break his silence, but instead, he simply shook his head, a small, sad smile touching the corners of his mouth. In that smile was a lifetime of experiences, joy and sorrow, triumph and loss, all distilled into a single, eloquent expression. The smile hit Alex like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his anger momentarily giving way to confusion. For the briefest of moments, a flicker of recognition passed across his face, as if something about Bill's demeanor had struck a chord deep within his memory. But before he could process this fleeting sensation, the alcohol and anger reasserted themselves. Alex opened his mouth, ready to launch into another tirade, but the words died on his lips as he met Bill's steady gaze once more. In the ensuing silence, the hum of the refrigerators and the soft clinking of glasses seemed unnaturally loud. The patrons of the Fallen Star Tavern found themselves holding their breath, caught in the gravitational pull of the unfolding drama. They sensed that they were witnessing a pivotal moment, though none could have predicted the profound impact this encounter would have on both men's lives. As the tension in the room reached its zenith, Bill finally broke his silence, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling the entire space. His words, when they came, would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Alex thought he knew about himself, about valor, and about the true cost of war. The Fallen Star Tavern seemed to hold its breath as Bill's voice, soft yet somehow filling the entire room, broke the tense silence. "You've had your say," he began, each word measured and deliberate. "But you don't know me. You don't know what I've seen or done." The simple statement hung in the air, its weight palpable. Alex, who had been poised to continue his tirade, found himself suddenly at a loss for words. The quiet dignity in Bill's voice cut through his drunken haze like a knife, leaving him momentarily disarmed. Bill's eyes, clear and steady, met Alex's gaze unflinchingly. There was no anger in those eyes, no challenge or reproach. Instead, they held a depth of understanding that seemed to reach into the very core of Alex's being. It was as if Bill could see past the anger and bitterness, recognizing the pain that fueled Alex's outburst. The other patrons in the bar watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and fascination. The tension that had been building seemed to shift, transforming into something more complex and nuanced. Old Joe, in his corner, leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concentration as he strained to hear every word. Bill continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We all carry our burdens, son. Some are just more visible than others." He gestured to his old military jacket, the faded patches and insignias a testament to years of service. "This isn't about seeking glory or sympathy. It's a part of who I am, for better or worse." Alex felt a sudden, uncomfortable tightness in his chest. The calm rationality of Bill's response threw his own behavior into sharp relief, making him acutely aware of the spectacle he had been making. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words wouldn't come. Sensing Alex's inner turmoil, Mark stepped closer to his friend. "Come on, man," he said softly. "Let's call it a night." But Alex shrugged him off, his eyes still fixed on Bill. The old veteran took a slow sip of his drink, his movements unhurried and deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years, of experiences that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of the small tavern. "One war leaves its mark on all of us, son. Some scars are visible, others, well, they run deeper than the eye can see." Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something in Bill's words, in the cadence of his voice, that stirred a memory deep within him. A foggy recollection of chaos, of gunfire and screams, of a calm voice cutting through the madness. He shook his head, trying to clear the sudden rush of images. "I served too, you know," Alex said, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. The admission seemed to cost him, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real somehow. "But I don't go around wearing a jacket, looking for sympathy." Bill nodded slowly, a sad smile touching the corners of his mouth. "We all carry things differently," he replied softly. "This jacket, it's not about sympathy. It's a reminder of the good men I served with, of the ones who didn't make it back. It's about honoring their memory." The words struck a chord within Alex. He thought of his own uniform, carefully folded and hidden away in the back of his closet. He hadn't been able to look at it since his discharge, the sight of it bringing back too many painful memories. Around them, the atmosphere in the bar had shifted. The other patrons, who had been watching the confrontation with wary anticipation, now leaned in, drawn by the quiet intensity of the exchange. Even Lucy, behind the bar, had paused in her work, her eyes flicking between the two men. "You speak as if you know," Alex said, a note of challenge still in his voice, though it was tempered now by a growing curiosity. "As if you've been there." Bill's eyes seemed to look past Alex, focusing on something distant and unseen. "I've seen my share of conflicts, son, Vietnam, mostly. But I've been in other places too, places that don't make it into the history books." There was something in Bill's tone, a hint of shared experience, that resonated with Alex. Despite himself, he found his anger ebbing, replaced by a reluctant respect. "Vietnam," he muttered. "My old man served there. Never talked about it much." Bill nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Many don't. Some wounds are too deep for words." A heavy silence fell between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Alex felt the weight of his earlier words, the shame of his behavior, settling on his shoulders. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to ask more questions, but Bill raised a hand, stopping him. "We've all got our demons, son," Bill said gently. "The key is not letting them define us. It's about finding a way to live with them, to use what we've been through to make a difference." Alex swallowed hard, feeling a lump forming in his throat. The wisdom in Bill's words, the quiet strength in his demeanor, stirred something within him. It was as if a door had been opened, allowing a glimmer of light into the darkness that had consumed him for so long. "How?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you do it? How do you move on?" Bill's expression softened, compassion replacing the earlier stoicism. "One day at a time, son. You acknowledge the pain, honor the memories, but you don't let them control you. You find purpose, something to fight for, here and now." As Bill spoke, Alex felt something shift within him. The anger that had been his constant companion for so long began to fade, replaced by a tentative hope. For the first time in years, he felt a connection to someone who truly understood, someone who had walked the path he now found himself on. The other patrons in the bar watched in respectful silence, sensing the significance of the moment. Old Joe, in his corner, nodded slowly, a look of approval on his weathered face. Lucy, behind the bar, discreetly wiped away a tear. Alex took a deep breath, steadying himself. I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out haltingly. "For what I said earlier, I didn't mean—" Bill waved away the apology. "No need for that, son. We've all had our moments. What matters is what we do moving forward." As the two men continued to talk, their voices low and earnest, the atmosphere in the Fallen Star Tavern slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed, glasses clinked, and the jukebox in the corner started up with a soft melody. But for Alex and Bill, the world had shifted. In that small, dimly lit bar, an unlikely connection had been forged. A bridge across generations built on shared experiences and mutual understanding. Neither man could have predicted how this chance encounter would change their lives, setting them both on a path of healing and redemption. As the night wore on, the patrons of the Fallen Star Tavern couldn't help but glance occasionally at the odd pair at the bar, the young veteran with the haunted eyes and the old soldier with the faded jacket. There was something in their quiet conversation, in the way they leaned towards each other, that spoke of a profound change taking place. And in that moment, as the neon lights flickered and the old ceiling fan creaked overhead, the Fallen Star Tavern became more than just a local watering hole. It became a place of transformation, a crucible where the raw pain of the past could be forged into something new, something hopeful. Little did Alex know that this conversation was just the beginning. The words exchanged that night would echo in his mind for days to come, slowly but surely altering his perception of himself, his past, and his future. And as for Bill, the simple act of reaching out to a troubled young veteran would reignite a sense of purpose he thought he had lost long ago. As the night deepened and the conversation between Alex and Bill continued, neither man was aware of the profound impact this chance encounter would have on their lives. They were oblivious to the fact that this was just the first chapter in a story of healing, redemption, and unexpected friendship that would unfold in the coming days and weeks. As the night wore on in the Fallen Star Tavern, the initial tension had dissipated, replaced by a strange, almost reverent atmosphere. Alex found himself seated next to Bill, their earlier confrontation seeming like a distant memory. The other patrons had gradually returned to their own conversations, though many still cast curious glances at the unlikely pair. Bill's voice, low and steady, wove a tapestry of memories, some painful, others tinged with a bittersweet nostalgia. Alex listened, enraptured, as the old veteran spoke of jungles and deserts, of bonds forged in the crucible of combat, and of the long, difficult road that led from the battlefield back to civilian life. "You know," Bill said, pausing to take a sip of his drink, "there was this one time, deep in the A Shau Valley." He trailed off, his eyes taking on a faraway look. Something in Bill's tone, in the way he held himself as he spoke, stirred something deep within Alex. It was like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock, opening a door to memories he had struggled to keep buried. Suddenly, Alex wasn't in the Fallen Star Tavern anymore. The smoky air and the soft clink of glasses faded away, replaced by the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening roar of automatic weapons fire. He was back there, in that hellish moment that had haunted his dreams for years. The memory crashed over him like a wave, vivid and all-consuming. He could feel the grit of sand in his mouth, taste the metallic tang of fear on his tongue. The relentless Afghan sun beat down on him as he huddled behind a low stone wall, his unit pinned down by enemy fire that seemed to come from every direction. In his mind's eye, Alex saw again the chaos of that day. The air was thick with dust and smoke, punctuated by the sharp cracks of gunfire and the dull thuds of explosions. Men shouted, their voices hoarse with fear and determination. And through it all, Alex remembered the paralyzing terror, the certainty that this time there was no way out. He recalled looking down at his hands, seeing them shake as he tried to reload his weapon. His mouth was dry, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Around him, his fellow soldiers, men he had trained with, laughed with, lived with for months, were falling. The sound of their cries mingled with the cacophony of battle, a symphony of horror that seemed to go on forever. And then, cutting through the chaos like a beacon of hope, came a voice. Calm, authoritative. It rose above the din of battle. Hold your positions. Help is on the way. Alex remembered looking up, squinting against the sun and dust, to see a figure moving through the maelstrom. A senior officer, his uniform caked with dust and blood, was making his way along their line. He moved with purpose, seemingly oblivious to the bullets whizzing past, pausing here and there to offer encouragement or give orders. As the officer drew closer, Alex caught a glimpse of his face, older than most of the men in the unit, lined with experience and determination. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, Alex felt a surge of hope. Something in the officer's steady gaze promised that they would make it through this, that all was not lost. The memory blurred then, fragmenting into a series of disjointed images. Alex recalled the officer organizing a desperate counterattack, rallying the men with a mixture of encouragement and stern commands. He remembered the feeling of movement, of pushing forward despite the fear that threatened to root him to the spot. And then, pain. White-hot and all-consuming, it exploded in his leg as a bullet found its mark. Alex fell, the world spinning around him. He could hear shouts, feel hands grabbing at him, trying to pull him to safety. But the pain was overwhelming, threatening to drag him into unconsciousness. Just as the darkness was about to claim him, Alex felt strong arms lifting him. Through the haze of pain, he looked up to see the face of the officer who had led the counterattack. The man's features were blurred, obscured by sweat and grime, but his eyes, those eyes were clear, filled with a determination that seemed to will Alex to hold on. "Stay with me, soldier." The officer's voice came from far away. "We're getting out of here. Just hold on." The rest of the memory was a jumble of sensations. The jolting movement as he was carried across the battlefield, the continued sounds of gunfire growing more distant, the feeling of being loaded onto a helicopter. Throughout it all, the steady presence of the officer remained, an anchor in the storm of pain and confusion. As suddenly as it had come, the memory released its hold on Alex. He found himself back in the present, sitting at the bar in the Fallen Star Tavern. His heart was racing, his palms slick with sweat. He blinked, trying to orient himself, to shake off the lingering echoes of that long-ago battle. Bill was looking at him with concern, one weathered hand resting lightly on Alex's arm. "You all right there, son?" he asked, his voice gentle. "You looked like you were a million miles away for a moment." Alex swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He reached for his glass with a shaking hand, taking a long swallow before he could trust himself to speak. "Yeah," he managed finally, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just remembering something." As he looked at Bill, really looked at him for the first time that night, Alex felt a jolt of recognition. There was something familiar about the old veteran's eyes, about the way he held himself. A crazy, impossible thought began to form in the back of Alex's mind. Could it be? No, it was impossible. The odds were astronomical. And yet, Alex found himself studying Bill's face, searching for traces of the officer from his memories. The years would have changed him, of course, but surely there would be something, some hint of recognition. "Where did you say you served again?" Alex asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the sudden pounding of his heart. Bill raised an eyebrow at the abrupt change of subject, but answered readily enough. "All over, really. Vietnam, mostly. But I had a few tours in other places. The Middle East, Afghanistan." At the mention of Afghanistan, Alex felt his breath catch in his throat. The impossible thought grew stronger, more insistent. He opened his mouth to ask more, to somehow confirm or deny the wild suspicion that had taken root in his mind. But before he could form the words, Lucy appeared at their side, her face apologetic. "I'm sorry, guys, but we're closing up for the night." Alex blinked, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. The bar had emptied while he was lost in his memories, leaving just a handful of patrons nursing their final drinks. As he stood, slightly unsteady after the emotional roller coaster of the evening, Alex felt a strange reluctance to leave. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, so much he needed to know. But Bill was already rising, reaching for his jacket. "Well, son," the old veteran said, clapping Alex gently on the shoulder, "it's been quite a night. Take care of yourself, you hear?" Alex nodded, words failing him as he watched Bill make his way towards the door. Just as the old man was about to step out into the night, Alex found his voice. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he called out, a note of desperation creeping into his tone. Bill paused, turning back with a small smile. "I reckon I might be," he said. "Same time, same place." As the door closed behind Bill, Alex sank back onto his bar stool, his mind reeling. The memory of that day in Afghanistan, long suppressed, now blazed bright in his consciousness. And alongside it, a growing certainty that his chance encounter with Bill was far more than it seemed. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow, he would get answers. But for now, as Lucy gently but firmly ushered him out of the bar, Alex found himself facing a long night of restless thoughts and half-remembered dreams. The cool night air hit him as he stepped outside, carrying with it the promise of a new day. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Alex felt a glimmer of something he had thought lost forever: hope. The following evening found Alex pacing outside the Fallen Star Tavern, his nerves frayed and his mind racing. He had barely slept, the memories unearthed by his conversation with Bill playing on an endless loop in his head. The crazy, impossible idea that had taken root the night before had grown, fueled by half-remembered details and a desperate need for answers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Alex finally mustered the courage to push open the tavern door. The familiar jingle of bells announced his arrival, and he found his eyes immediately drawn to the far end of the bar. There, as if he had never left, sat Bill. The old veteran was nursing a drink, his weathered hands wrapped around the glass, his eyes distant and thoughtful. As Alex approached, Bill looked up, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Evening, son," Bill said, gesturing to the empty stool beside him. "Wasn't sure you'd be back." Alex sank onto the stool, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Bill must be able to hear it. Up close, in the warm glow of the bar lights, he studied the old man's face with new intensity. There was something there, something familiar that went beyond their brief encounter the night before. I had to come back," Alex said, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. "There's something I need to ask you." Bill nodded, his expression open and patient. "Ask away, son. I'm not going anywhere." Alex took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Last night, when we were talking, it brought back some memories I've been trying to forget for a long time." Bill's eyes softened with understanding. War has a way of doing that. Some memories never really leave us. Yeah, Alex agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. But this was different. It wasn't just about the war. It was about... He paused, struggling to find the right words. It was about you. Bill's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, waiting for Alex to continue. You mentioned serving in Afghanistan, Alex said, his words coming faster now, tumbling out as if a dam had broken. I was there too. Helmand Province, 2004. We were pinned down, outnumbered. I was sure we were all going to die there. As Alex spoke, he saw a flicker of recognition in Bill's eyes. The old veteran's posture changed subtly, becoming more alert, more focused. There was an officer, Alex continued, his voice shaking slightly. He came out of nowhere, organized a counterattack. He saved us. Saved me. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. I was hit. I thought I was done for. But this officer, he carried me out. Through the gunfire, the chaos. He got me to safety. Bill's face had grown very still, his eyes never leaving Alex's face. There was a tension in the air, a sense of something momentous balancing on a knife's edge. I never knew his name, Alex said softly. Never got to thank him, but I never forgot his face, or his eyes. He looked directly at Bill, then, his heart pounding. Eyes just like yours. For a long moment, silence reigned. The ambient noise of the bar seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the faint clink of ice in Bill's glass. Finally, Bill spoke, his voice low and filled with emotion. Helmand Province, he said, the words heavy with memory. That was a bad day. We lost a lot of good men. Alex felt his breath catch in his throat. You remember? He whispered, a statement more than a question. Bill nodded slowly. I remember, he confirmed. I remember a young soldier, barely more than a boy, with determination in his eyes even as the world was falling apart around him. Tears welled up in Alex's eyes, blurring his vision. It was you, he said, his voice breaking. All this time, it was you. Bill reached out, placing a weathered hand on Alex's arm. I didn't know, he said softly. When you came in last night, full of anger and pain, I had no idea. You've changed, son. We all have. Alex wiped at his eyes, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions coursing through him. I can't believe it, he managed. All these years, I've carried that memory. It kept me going in my darkest moments. And now, you're here. A small smile touched Bill's lips. Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle, he said. I've often wondered about the men I served with, the ones I helped. I'm glad to see you made it, son. Because of you, Alex said fervently. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. You saved my life that day. Bill shook his head slowly. We saved each other, he corrected gently. That's what soldiers do. We look out for our own. As the reality of the situation sank in, Alex felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The bitterness and anger that had been his constant companions for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of gratitude so profound it left him speechless. Around them, the other patrons of the Fallen Star Tavern continued their conversations, oblivious to the momentous revelation taking place in their midst. But for Alex and Bill, the world had shifted on its axis. The chance encounter that had begun with anger and misunderstanding had transformed into something miraculous, a reunion neither man had ever expected. I don't know what to say, Alex admitted, his voice thick with emotion. How do you thank someone for saving your life? Bill's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. You live it, son, he said simply. You live it well, and you help others when you can. That's all the thanks I need. As the night wore on, Alex and Bill talked, their conversation flowing easily now, unburdened by the barriers of the past. They shared stories of their time in service, of the challenges they'd faced in returning to civilian life, and of the long, often difficult journey of healing. For Alex, it was as if a missing piece of his life had finally fallen into place. The anger that had driven him for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. And as he looked at Bill, not just the old veteran at the end of the bar, but the man who had saved his life, he felt a surge of determination. He would make the most of this second chance. He would honor the sacrifice and bravery of men like Bill by living his life to the fullest, by finding ways to give back and make a difference. As the bartender called for last orders, Alex realized that hours had passed in what felt like minutes. He and Bill stood, both reluctant for the evening to end. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Alex asked, echoing his question from the night before, but this time with hope rather than desperation in his voice. Bill smiled, clapping Alex on the shoulder. "I reckon I will," he said. "We've got a lot of catching up to do, you and I." As they stepped out into the cool night air, Alex felt as if he was seeing the world through new eyes. The stars seemed brighter, the future full of possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine before. He turned to Bill, words of gratitude on his lips, but the old veteran held up a hand, stopping him. "No need for that, son," Bill said softly. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything," Alex replied without hesitation. Bill's eyes were serious as he spoke. "Remember this feeling, this moment, and when you meet someone who's struggling, someone who's lost their way, be for them what I was for you, a lifeline, a reason to keep going." Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the promise settle on his shoulders. But for the first time in years, it was a weight he welcomed, a purpose he embraced wholeheartedly. As they parted ways, each heading home with minds full of memories and hearts full of newfound hope, both men knew that this was just the beginning. Their chance encounter had set them on a new path, one of healing, redemption, and the power of human connection. And in the quiet streets of their small town, as the Fallen Star Tavern's neon sign flickered behind them, a new chapter in both their lives was just beginning to unfold. The revelation hit Alex like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of his anger and bitterness. The enormity of the situation, that the man he had insulted, the veteran he had mocked, was the very same person who had saved his life years ago, crashed over him with overwhelming force. His legs suddenly weak, Alex sank back onto his bar stool, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the bar for support. The Fallen Star Tavern seemed to spin around him, the familiar sights and sounds blurring into a chaotic whirl of sensory input. "I can't believe it," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. He looked up at Bill, his vision blurred by tears that he couldn't hold back any longer. "It was you. All this time, it was you." Bill watched Alex with a mixture of concern and understanding, his weathered face etched with compassion. He reached out, placing a steadying hand on Alex's shoulder. "Easy there, son," he said softly. "Take a deep breath." But Alex was beyond such simple comfort. The floodgates had opened, and years of suppressed emotion came pouring out. His shoulders began to shake as sobs racked his body, each one seeming to come from the very depths of his soul. "I'm so sorry," Alex choked out between sobs. "I didn't know. I didn't recognize you. I was stupid, drunk, and angry, and I didn't know." The few remaining patrons in the bar turned to look at the unfolding scene, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Lucy, behind the bar, moved closer, worry etched on her face. But Bill waved her off gently, his focus entirely on the broken man before him. "It's all right, son," Bill said, his voice low and soothing. "We've all got our demons. I'm just glad you made it through." But Alex was inconsolable, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. "No, it's not all right," he insisted, his words coming in gasps between sobs. "I insulted you. I mocked your service. After everything you did for me. For all of us." He looked up at Bill, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. "How can you even stand to look at me? How can you forgive me for what I said?" Bill's expression softened further, a sad smile touching his lips. Because I understand. Alex, he said gently, I've been where you are. The anger, the bitterness, the feeling that the world has moved on and left you behind. I know how it eats at you, how it can turn you into someone you don't even recognize. Alex shook his head, unable to accept the easy forgiveness. But you're better than that. You saved my life. You've probably saved countless lives. And I'm nothing. Just a washed-up vet who can't even handle civilian life. Bill's hand tightened on Alex's shoulder, his voice taking on a firmer tone. Now you listen to me, son, he said, waiting until Alex met his gaze. You're not nothing. You're a survivor. You made it through hell and came back. That counts for something. Alex wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, his breath coming in shuddering gasps. But I've wasted it, he said brokenly. All these years. I've just been angry, pushing everyone away, drowning myself in booze and self-pity. And now you have a chance to change that, Bill said firmly. This moment, right here, this is your turning point. What matters isn't what you've done up to now. It's what you do from here on out. Alex stared at Bill, seeing not just the old veteran from the bar, but the brave officer who had carried him to safety all those years ago. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice small and lost. I don't know how to be anything else anymore. Bill's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. You start by forgiving yourself, son, he said softly. And then you take it one day at a time. You find something to live for, something to fight for, here and now. As Bill spoke, Alex felt something shift within him. The crushing weight of guilt and shame began to lift, replaced by a tentative hope. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady himself. I'm so sorry, he said again, but this time the words were calmer, more measured. For everything I said, for how I acted, you didn't deserve that. No one does. Bill nodded, accepting the apology with grace. Apology accepted, he said simply. Now, what are you going to do about it? Alex blinked, caught off guard by the question. Do. Yes, do, Bill repeated. Apologies are all well and good, but they're just words. What matters is what comes next. How are you going to make this right? Alex was silent for a long moment, considering. When he spoke, his voice was tentative but determined. I want to be better, he said. I want to honor what you did for me, what all our brothers and sisters in arms have done. I want to find a way to give back, to make a difference. A slow smile spread across Bill's face. Now that, he said, is a start. As Alex's sobs subsided and his breathing steadied, he became aware of the quiet that had fallen over the bar. He looked around, suddenly self-conscious of the scene he had caused. But the faces he saw weren't judgmental or mocking. Instead, he saw understanding, empathy, and even a few tear-streaked cheeks among the other patrons. Lucy approached cautiously, setting 2 fresh drinks on the bar in front of Alex and Bill. On the house, she said softly, offering a watery smile. Alex nodded his thanks, unable to form words. He picked up the glass with a shaking hand, taking a small sip. The burn of the alcohol was familiar, but for the first time in years, it didn't bring the numbing relief he usually sought. Instead, he found he craved clarity, the clear-headedness to face the truth of his situation and the challenges ahead. Bill raised his own glass in a small salute. To new beginnings, he said quietly. Alex met his eyes, seeing in them not just the man who had saved him on the battlefield, but a potential mentor, a friend who could guide him through the difficult path of healing and redemption. To new beginnings, Alex echoed, his voice hoarse but steady. As they sat there in the quiet of the Fallen Star Tavern, the weight of their shared past and the promise of a new future hanging between them, both men knew that this was more than just a chance encounter. It was a pivot point, a moment that would define the rest of their lives. For Alex, it was the first step on a long road to recovery and redemption. And for Bill, it was a reminder of why he had served, why he had risked his life for others. In helping Alex find his way back, Bill had rediscovered his own sense of purpose. As the night deepened around them, the Fallen Star Tavern became more than just a local watering hole. It became a place of transformation, a crucible, where the raw pain of the past could be forged into something new, something hopeful. And in that moment, as Alex wiped the last of his tears and straightened his shoulders, both men silently vowed to make the most of this second chance. The road ahead would not be easy, but with understanding, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of war and reaffirmed in this humble bar, they knew they would face it together. As the initial storm of emotion subsided, a new atmosphere settled over Alex and Bill's corner of the Fallen Star Tavern. The air between them felt clearer somehow, as if the catharsis of Alex's breakdown had washed away years of accumulated pain and misunderstanding. Alex took a deep, steadying breath, his hands still shaking slightly as he wrapped them around his glass. He looked up at Bill, seeing the older man not just as a veteran or a hero, but as a fellow traveler on the difficult road of life after war. "I don't even know where to begin," Alex said, his voice hoarse from crying. "How do you thank someone for saving your life? Twice now." Bill's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. "We were all just trying to survive out there. I'm glad I could help, but that's in the past. What matters now is how you live your life moving forward." Alex nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom in Bill's words. For so long, he had been trapped in the past, reliving his traumas and nursing his anger. The idea of focusing on the future, of moving forward, felt both liberating and terrifying. "I'm not sure I know how to do that anymore," Alex admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been stuck for so long, Bill. I don't know if I remember how to live." Bill leaned forward, his eyes intense and full of understanding. "You start small," he said. "One day at a time. You find something to get up for in the morning, something to work towards. It doesn't have to be big, just something that matters to you." Alex considered this, turning the idea over in his mind. "I used to love working with my hands," he said slowly, as if rediscovering a long-forgotten part of himself. "Before I enlisted, I did some carpentry. It was peaceful." A smile touched Bill's lips. "That's a start," he encouraged. "Maybe you could look into that again. Local community centers often have workshops, or you could volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. It's a way to use your skills and give back at the same time." As they talked, Alex felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The future, which had for so long seemed like a bleak and pointless expanse, began to take on shape and color. "I'd like that," Alex said, surprised to find he truly meant it. "And maybe I could find a way to help other vets. Pay forward what you've done for me." Bill's eyes lit up at this. "Now that's an idea," he said warmly. "There's always a need for people who understand, who've been there. Support groups, mentoring programs. The possibilities are endless." As they continued to talk, mapping out potential paths and sharing ideas, Alex felt the weight of years of isolation and anger begin to lift. In its place, a new sense of purpose began to take root. Around them, the Fallen Star Tavern had settled into the quiet lull of late evening. The jukebox played softly in the corner, and the few remaining patrons spoke in hushed tones, as if reluctant to intrude on the moment of transformation taking place at the bar. Lucy approached, her eyes warm with understanding. "We're closing up soon, guys," she said gently, "but take your time. No rush." Alex looked up, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. The emotional roller coaster of the evening had left him drained, but oddly invigorated. He turned back to Bill, a question forming on his lips. Could we maybe meet again?" Alex asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "I think I could use some guidance, if you're willing." Bill's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Of course, son," he said, reaching out to clasp Alex's shoulder. "I'd be honored. How about we meet here next week? Same time?" Alex nodded, a lump forming in his throat at the simple kindness. "I'd like that," he managed. As they stood to leave, Alex felt a sudden urge to cement the moment, to make sure it wasn't just a dream that would evaporate in the harsh light of day. "Bill," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "I know I said it before, but I need you to know how sorry I am, for how I acted, for what I said. You didn't deserve that." Bill's eyes softened, filled with a compassion that spoke of his own battles and hard-won peace. "Alex," he said gently, "a forgiveness isn't just something I'm giving you. It's a gift you need to give yourself too. We've all made mistakes, said things we regret. The measure of a man isn't in never falling, but in how he picks himself up afterwards." These words hit Alex like a physical force, bringing fresh tears to his eyes. But these weren't the bitter tears of before. They were tears of release, of a burden finally set down. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the streets quiet and bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, Alex felt as if he was seeing the world anew. The stars above seemed brighter, the future no longer a threat, but a canvas of possibilities. "Thank you," Alex said simply, knowing the words were inadequate, but unable to express the depth of his gratitude any other way. Bill smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with warmth. "No need for thanks," he said. "Just live well, Alex. That's all the gratitude I need." As they parted ways, each heading home with minds full of memories and hearts full of newfound hope, both men knew that this was just the beginning. Their chance encounter, born from misunderstanding and pain, had blossomed into something profound, a bond that transcended age and rank, rooted in shared experiences and mutual understanding. Alex walked home slowly, his steps lighter than they had been in years. For the first time in a long time, he looked forward to the dawn, to the promise of a new day and the chance to begin again. And in the quiet streets of their small town, as the neon sign of the Fallen Star Tavern flickered behind them, a story of redemption, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit had only just begun to unfold. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But armed with newfound purpose and the support of an unexpected ally, Alex felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. As he reached his apartment, Alex paused at the door, looking back in the direction of the tavern. He made a silent promise, to Bill, to himself, and to all those who had served alongside him. He would make the most of this second chance. He would honor their sacrifices by living fully, by finding ways to give back, and by never forgetting the power of compassion and understanding. With a deep breath, Alex turned the key and stepped inside. Tomorrow was a new day, the first day of the rest of his life. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he looked forward to what it might bring. As the night deepened and the town settled into slumber, the story of Alex and Bill, a tale of redemption, forgiveness, and unexpected friendship, became a part of the fabric of the community. It served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found, and that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And in the quiet hours before dawn, as Alex finally drifted off to sleep, his dreams were no longer haunted by the specters of war. Instead, they were filled with possibilities, with the faces of those he might help, and with the quiet strength of an old soldier who had shown him the way back to life. The Fallen Star Tavern, once just a local watering hole, had become hallowed ground, a place where broken spirits could be mended, where the burdens of the past could be set down, and where new beginnings could take root and flourish. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, it heralded not just a new day, but a new chapter in the lives of two men brought together by fate, bound by shared experiences, and united in their journey towards healing and redemption.
This channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.